it's me. So today I'm making another scary Halloween video. So today's story is about a haunted hotel that is in my state. It's called the Crescent Hotel. It's a popular haunted hotel, and it's in my state, and I thought it'd be cool to tell the history of it. And then there's another thing I'm going to tell you guys about. It's kind of in the mood set for Halloween, but it's not really a haunted place. It's more like a murder story. But before you even watch it, I'm gonna warn you that there's gonna be a lot of inappropriate stuff in it, like gory stuff. But don't make fun of me, but I really like that stuff. So if you don't like it, I'm just telling you to click off now. As you can see in the background of this video, right here, that is the Crescent Hotel. That's a picture of it. So yeah, and I'm gonna tell you guys about the history. For decades upon decades, the stories of the Baker years at this 1886 Crescent Hotel have been told. With no living eyewitnesses to these stories, there were mere legend. It wasn't until earlier this year that actual proof of these stories were literally uncovered when the Arkansas's Archaeological Survey team carefully uncovered the secret bottle grave of the Crescent's most infamous resident owner, Norman Baker. Also unearthed, it seems, was an additional paranormal activity further validating this historic resort located atop the Arkansas Ozarks as America's most haunted hotel. This ghostly moniker has now been chiseled into granite. Sorry if I don't pronounce or say something right. I try to read as best as I can. I'm reading this on a website, so I'll leave the links to the websites in the description if you want to go read it. But, so yeah, I already know about the history because I already, looked up this, but, my friend, she's not my friend anymore, but her and her family were actually going to go to the Crescent Hotel. And I was like, you guys are crazy if you're going there. But they didn't end up going. I don't know why, but probably because they're scaredy cats. Anyway. Or more accurately stated, limestone, the predominant rock formations of Crescent Mountain. Baker, a charlatan from Mustang, IA, owned the hotel in the late 1930s when he operated the structure as a cancer hospital where promises of a cure filled the hotel. He's not actually, I read stories about him. He's not actually a good guy. He's not actually treating people with suffering victims of the disease. His bottles contain several of his curing potions, despite the fact that no one was ever cured, and B, fleshly medical specimen extracted from his patients, despite the fact that Baker was not a doctor. Also found was an identical section of one of his promotional movies of find that the archaeologist said was like finding Baker's business card. We had heard the stories. We had read the promises of Baker's promotional material. We had even seen his poster where he proudly displays his bottled cures and bottled tumors extracted from his patients, explained Jack Moyer, hotel vice president and general manager. But it wasn't until more than 500 bottles from the northwest corner of our 15 acres were excavated during a formal archaeological dig did we actually get to see these antique bottles of maker proof. Added proof of these bottles' authenticity came during an interview with two ladies who served as a hotel as wait persons while in high school. Each, upon seeing them again, remembered the bottles as they saw during excursions to the hotel basement area was Baker's morning. It was where the bottle was stored in a displayed manner. The legend now proved that has spawned such a often re-experienced paranormal encounters as children being seen hustled under the autopsy table, pleading for help. Reoccurrence of a Baker patient who also served as a hospital assistant being seen in around room 419, better known as Theodore's room. The early morning loud speaking of wheels in the third floor corridor, accompanied by sightings of a nurse pushing a corpse-laden gurney down the hallway, only to see it vanish into thin air, and the numerous conversations with former patients by way of responses via an EMF, electromagnetic field, ghost meter during paranormal investigations. The interest in the paranormal aspect of the Crescent Hotel has drawn more than 15 national and international television production companies to visit this historic hotel of America and air ghostly episodes of the chat. Two such notable programs are the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures. I love that ghost show. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that, but they're a cool show. And the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters. With the airing of each episode, ghosts flock to Eureka Springs to see firsthand the hotel and now its bottle, and our numbers growing the best of the unearthed bottles is now back on display in the Crescent Morgue, both the morgue complete with autopsy table and a walk-in cooler where Baker stored catheters, parts. Ew, this guy is sick and gross. Are open for public viewing as part of the hotel's nightly ghost tour. Even the burial site, the archaeological dig local, has been preserved and is now open for viewing during the hotel VIP's ghost tour. To add the enhanced paranormal interest during the month of October, hotel guests will also be able to take part in such extra resort as Flickering Tales, a campfire circle where Ozark ghost stories are told under a nighttime sky, and a private paranormal panel entitled Ghost Tour Guides, Their Inside Stories, a forum where veteran Crescent Hotel ghost guides tell of their personal hair-raising encounters while touring the Grand Old Lady of the Ozarks. So that's it for this one. There's more history, and I might leave more links to more websites if you want to learn more about the history, but I think that's all I'm going to read for today, and now let's move on to the next. So this story is about people who were murdered in I can't pronounce it. Viscilla, Iowa. I'm sorry. Hold on. Viscilla axe murder. So this is a story about a group of family, and I'm about to tell you the full story, but I've read it like a lot of times, so I think I can kind of summarize up because I'm about to show you guys something about like a family of kids and two parents and people who came to stay over at their house who were brutally murdered in their bed by an unknown killer who had an axe and is still unknown to this day. And this took place in 1912. And this paranormal TV people called Ghost Adventures caught proof of who they think was the murderer. I'm about to show you the clip, and this actually makes sense. If this guy is the actual murderer, I'm about to show you proof that could actually probably prove that this guy is the murderer. But nobody really knows, but I believe it is. But this murder is still unsolved, but whoever it is, I mean, they got away. I mean, it's over 100 years later, and the case was never solved. It stayed cold. I mean, whoever murdered them, they took their bad crime with them to their grave. I mean, can't be arrested in if you're dead. But.
This was clearly a different voice than the children we were hearing downstairs, telling us we were now in the presence of a different spirit.
Dude, I'm not feeling good at all. Give us a name. What is the murderer's name? What is the murderer's name?
On June 18th, 1912, Andy Sawyer was detained by the sheriff as a suspect in the Viscilla axe murders. The day after the incident, this deranged homeless man made crazed mutterings about the murder to his employer, along with several suspicious relevant actions. His employer's son witnessed Andy Sawyer suddenly jump up and say to himself, "I will cut your damn heads off." At the same time, Andy made striking motions. It was also a fact that Andy Sawyer slept with his axe.
So I'm about to tell you the story of the Viscilla axe murder house, and then afterwards I'm going to show you the suspects and Andy, the guy that you saw in the video. I'm going to show you proof that I think it was him, but there's something that makes it could be him, but it's just hard, and they didn't have like all this DNA stuff and like stuff that they can easily use to find the murder like they do now. But I mean, I really wish they would have figured out who the murderer was, because I would be mad if someone, like, let's say it was my cousin, someone brutally murdered my cousin, like freaking like hit him on the head with the axe while you're sleeping. Like, oh my god, that's just so gross, and it's just sickening. Anyway, the bloody Viscilla axe murders have stumped authorities for over a century, despite numerous suspects, 2 trials, and a confession. At the end of a quiet street in Viscilla, Iowa, there sits an old white frame house. Up the street, there are a group of churches, and a few blocks away is a park that faces a middle school. The old white house looks like many of the others that filled the neighborhood, but unlike them, it lies abandoned. The house emits no light or sound, and upon closer inspection, the doors are found to be tightly boarded up. A small sign out front reads Viscilla Axe Murder House. Despite its ominous air, the little white house was once filled with life that was harshly stamped down one warm summer night in 1912, when a mysterious stranger broke in and viciously bludgeoned its 8 sleeping inhabitants to death. The event would come to be known as the Viscilla Axe Murders and would baffle law enforcement for over a century. On June 10th, 1912, the Moore family was sleeping peacefully in their beds. Joe and Sarah were asleep upstairs, while their 4 children were resting in a room down the hall. In a guest room on the first floor were 2 girls, Stillinger sisters, who had come for a sleepover. Shortly after midnight, a stranger entered through the unlocked door, not an uncommon sight, and not an uncommon sight in what was considered a small, safe, friendly town, and plucked an oil lamp from a nearby table, rigged it to burn so low it supplied light for barely one person. On one hand, the stranger held the lamp, lighting the way through the house. In his other hand, he held an axe. This is what he's going to use to murder them. Ignoring the sleeping girls downstairs, the stranger made his way up to the stairs. Oh my god, this is going to be the gory. Ew, it's guided by the lamp and seemingly unerring knowledge of the home's layout. He crept past the room with the children and into Mr. and Miss Moore's bedroom. Then he made his way to the children's room and finally back down to the bedroom stairs. So basically, he walked into their rooms, he took the axe and he swung it high up in the air and then smashed their skulls with the axe, and blood probably splattered everywhere. Oh my god, I can't. It's just, it just sounds so gross. Then, as quickly and silently as he had arrived, the stranger left, taking keys from the home and locking the door behind him. The next morning, the neighbors became suspicious, noticing that the usually rambunctious home was dead quiet. They alerted Joe's brother, who arrived to take a look. What he saw after letting himself in with his own key was enough to make him sick. I think he saw when he unlocked the door, he saw dead bodies on the ground. I would scream and call it. Everyone in the house was dead, all 8 of them bludgeoned beyond recognition. Police determined that the Moore parents had been murdered first and with obvious force. The axe that had been used to kill them had been swung so high above the murderer's head that it gouged the ceiling above the bed. Ew, that's so gross. Joe alone had been hit with the axe at least 30 times. The faces of both parents as well as the children had been reduced to nothing but a bloody pulp. That is so gross and sickening. The state of the bodies wasn't the most concerning part, however. Once the police had searched the home after murdering the Moores, the killer had apparently set up some kind of ritual. He had covered the Moores' parents' heads with sheets. This is the creepiest part. And the Moores' children's faces with clothing. He then went through each room in the house, covering all of the mirrors and windows with cloths and towels. At some point, he took a 2-pound piece of uncooked bacon from the fridge and placed it in the living room along with the keychain. A bowl of water was found in the home, spirals of blood swirling through it. Police believed that the murderer had washed his hands before leaving. By the time the coroner, a minister, and several doctors had thoroughly pursued the crime scene. Word of the vicious crime had spread, and the crowd outside the home had grown. Officials cautioned the townspeople against going inside, but as soon as the premises was clear, at least 100 townspeople gave in to their gross fascinations and trespassed through the blood-splattered home. One of the townspeople even took a fragment of Joe's skull as a keepsake. That's disgusting! Ew! As for the perpetrator of the viscilla murders, the police had shockingly few leads. A few half-hearted efforts to search the town and surrounding countryside were made, though most officials believed that with the roughly 5 hours head start that the killer had, he would probably be long gone. Honestly, that's true. They never found him. Bloodhounds were brought in, but there was no success as the crime scene had been fully demolished by the townspeople. Dude! You should have let him in there. If these suspects were named over time, though, none of them panned out. First was Frank Jones, a local businessman who had been in competition with Joe Moore. Moore had worked for Jones for several years in the farm equipment sales before leaving and starting his own business. There was also a rumor that Joe was having an affair with Jones' daughter-in-law, though the reports were unfounded. The townspeople insist, however, that the Moores and the Jones harbored a deep hatred for each other. No one admits it was bad enough to spark a murder. The second suspect seemed more likely and even confessed to the murders, though he later recanted, claiming police brutally. Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly was an English immigrant who had a history of sexual deviancy and mental problems. He even admitted to being in town the night of the Viscilla axe murders and admitted that he had left early in the morning. Though his small stature and meek personality led some to doubt his involvement. There were certain factors police believed made him the perfect candidate. Kelly was left-handed, which police determined from the blood splatters that the killer must be. He also had a history with the Moore family, as many had seen him watching them at church, while at church and out and about in town. A dry cleaner in a neighborhood town had received bloody clothing from Kelly a few days after the murder. He reportedly asked police for access to the home after the crime while posting as a Scotland Yard officer. At one point, after a long interrogation, he eventually signed a confession detailing the crime. However, he almost immediately recanted and a jury refused to indict him. For years, police looked into every possible scenario that could have culminated in the Viscilla Axe murders. Was it a single attack or part of a larger string of murders? Nobody knows. Was it likely to be a local perpetrator or a traveling killer simply passing through town and taking an opportunity? Some reports of similar enough crimes happened throughout the country began to pop up, though the crimes were not quite as gruesome. There were two common threats: the use of an axe as the murder weapon and the presence of an oil lamp set to burn extremely low at the scene. Despite the commonalities, however, no actual connections could be made. The case eventually ran cold and the house was boarded up. No scale was ever attempted and no changes were made to the original layout. Now the house sits at the end of the quiet street, as it always has, while life goes on around it, undeterred by the horrors that were once committed within. Now let's go and see who the suspects of the Viscilla Axe murders. So the first guy is named William Blackie, and it says he was the prime suspect of the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City and Detective James Newton Wilkerson. According to the Wilkerson investigation, the murder of Joe Moore and the other accompaniments of the Moore home were committed by Mansfield, who was in turn hired by F.M. Jones. Mansfield was also known as George Worley or Jack Turnbull. According to Wilkerson, Mansfield was a cocaine and serial killer. Wilkerson also believed Mansfield was responsible for the axe murders of his wife, infant child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois on July 5th, 1914, 2 years after the Viscilla Axe murders committed in Pella, Kansas. 4 days before the Viscilla murders and the murders of Jenny Peterson and Jenny Miller in Aurora, Colorado. According to the... Hold on, I'm just kind of reading the... Hold on, I'm trying to see where I left off. According to Wilkerson's investigation, all the murders were committed in precisely the same manner, indicating the same man committed them. Wilkerson stated that he could prove that Mansfield was present in each of these places on the night of the murders. In each murder, the victims were hacked to death with an axe, and the mirrors in the homes were covered. A burning lamp with the chimney off was left at the foot of the bed, and a basin in which the murderer washed was found in the kitchen. In each case, the murderer avoided leaving fingerprints by wearing gloves, which Wilkerson believed was strong evidence that the man was Mansfield, who knew his fingerprints were on file at the federal military prison at Leavenworth. Wilkerson managed to convince a grand jury to open an investigation in 1916, and Mansfield was arrested and brought to Montgomery County from Kansas City payroll records. However, provided an alibi that placed Mansfield in Illinois at the time of the Viscilla murders. He was released for lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit he brought against Wilkerson and was awarded a lot of money. I'm not going to read how much it was. It's just... Wilkerson believed that the pressure from Jones resulted not only in Mansfield's release, but also in the subsequent arrest in the trial of Reverend Kelly. Okay, so the next guy is named Reverend George Jack. I think we already talked. Yeah, we already talked about him in the last one, so I'm not gonna read it. Okay, so this next guy is the Henry Lee Moore. There existed a strong possibility that a serial killer was actually at work in Wilkerson's case against Mansfield. Actually suggested the same. A federal officer assigned to the Viscilla case actually announced in May of 1913 that he had solved not only the Viscilla murders, but 22 others that had been committed in the Midwest around the same time frame. McClory's theory was that Henry Moore, no relation to Josiah Moore, was the serial killer responsible for all of the crimes. Henry Moore was actually convicted of the murders of his mother and maternal grandmother in Columbia, Missouri, just months after the murders in Viscilla. Moore's family members were killed just as brutally as the victims in Viscilla, and his weapon of choice was an axe. Henry Lee Moore was born on November 1st, 1874 in Boone County, Missouri. He was the eldest son of Enoch and Georgia and Wilson Moore. There were 3 other sons born of the couple. Henry's father was a farmer and served in the Civil War. His mother was a nurse. 2 of Henry's brothers, Tidden and Turner Moore, as well as his father, passed away before 1910. Henry's remaining brother, Charles, died in 1960 in Stockton, California. Charles left the area prior to the deaths of his mother and grandmother and did not return for the trial. It was unknown whether or not he was aware of the situation. In 1900, Henry was living with the family in Franklin County, Iowa, and working as a farmhand. It is suspected that Henry may have fathered a child with the young daughter of the farmer. Henry was sentenced to the Kansas State Reformatory in Hunch, Kansas on a forgery charge and was released on April 11th, 1911. The murders in Colorado Springs occurred in September of that same year. Testimony during Henry's trial indicated that he had lived with his mother and grandmother during whether he died or he was living at the time. During the Viscilla investigation, other axe murders also came to light. Just 9 months before the crime in Viscilla, H.C. Wayne, his wife and children, and their 2 children were bludgeoned with an axe in Colorado Springs, Colorado. A month later, in October of 1911, a family was killed in Monmouth, Illinois, and just a week later, 5 members of a family in Ellsworth, Kansas, were murdered as they slept, just a week before the killing of the Moors and Stillinger's in Viscilla. A man and his wife were killed in Apollo, Kansas. The similarities in the crimes were striking. McClarty received information about Moore's conviction from his father, who was the warden of the Leavenworth, Kansas Federal Penitentiary. It was his belief that Mr. Henry Moore had committed all of the murders for whatever reason. McClarty's announcement went largely ignored, and to our knowledge, Henry Moore was not convicted of any of the other crimes. So this next guy, next guy is Joe Ricks. An early suspect in the murders was Joe Ricks, a man who was arrested in Monmouth, Illinois, when he stepped off a train wearing shoes that were covered with blood. As you can see in the newspaper articles that discuss the accusation, the man was not recognized as the man seen in Venezuela asking for directions to the Moore home the day preceding the murders. So now the last guy is the guy who I think committed the murders because they talked about him in that ghost episode, and this is good proof that I think. Okay, so let's read. Every hobo, transit, and otherwise unaccounted for stranger was also suspect in the axe murders. One such suspect was a man named Andy Sawyer. As with many other suspects, no real evidence linked Mr. Sawyer to the crime. However, his name came up often in grand jury testimonies. According to Thomas Dyer of Burlington, Iowa, a bridge foreman and pile driver for the Burlington Railroad, Sawyer approached his crew in Creston at 6 a.m. on the morning the murders were discovered. Mr. Sawyer was clean-shaven and wearing a brown suit when he arrived. The shoes were covered in mud, and his pants were nearly to the knees. He asked for employment, and as Mr. Dyer needed an extra man, he was given the job on the spot. Mr. Dyer testified that later that evening, when the crew hit for, this is the creepy shit, Iowa, I can't really pronounce that. Mr. Sawyer purchased a newspaper, which he went off by himself to read. The newspaper carried a front page of the account of the Venezuela murders, and according to Dyer, was very much interested in it. Dyer's crew complained that Sawyer slept with his clothes on and was anxious to be by himself. They were also uneasy about the fact that Sawyer slept with his axe and often talked of the Venezuela murders and whether or not the killer had been apprehended. He apparently told Dyer personally that he had been in Venezuela that Sunday night if he heard of the murders and was afraid he might be a suspect, which was why he left and showed up in Creston. Dyer was suspicious and turned him over to the sheriff on June 18th of 1912. Prior to the sheriff arriving, Dyer testified that he walked up behind Sawyer and he was rubbing his head with both hands and all of a sudden jumped back and said to himself, "I will cut your God," I'm not saying that word, "D heads off." At the same time, he made striking motions with the axe and began hitting the pedals in front of him. So that, I think that's enough proof right there to say that this guy is just guilty. Also, Dyer's son, and this isn't it, there's more. Dyer's son also testified that one day as the crew drove through Venezuela, Sawyer told him that he would show him where the man that killed the Moore family got out of town. He said the man, how the hell would he not know this unless he was the murderer? Like, that just makes sense. He said the man that did the job jumped over a manor box, which he pointed out about 1.5 blocks away, and then showed where he crossed the railroad track, and there were footprints in the soggy ground north of the embankment. embankment. He then said for me to look on the other side of the car, and he would show me an old tree where he said the murderer stepped into the crock. According to J.R. Steyer, he looked over and saw such a tree south of the track, about 4 blocks away. Sawyer, however, was apparently dismissed as a suspect in the case when it was discovered that he was able to prove he'd been in Osceola, Iowa on the night of the murders. He had been arrested for vagrancy, and the Osceola sheriff recalled putting him on a train at approximately 11 p.m. that evening. So he was apparently in a different place at the time of the murder. That's the problem, but they say it was him, so maybe he's lying and he was there. I don't know. But maybe he did go to that place and then he went to murder them after, because it really does sound like it was him who murdered them. But I don't know, it remains a mystery. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll try to read better my more new videos. But that's it for this video. Bye.